Moving on to part two of The Flash, we now have things get a little bit more mixed up with some less well-defined heroes and villains. First up, we do have a pretty clearly defined villain in The Bad Lieutenant, and this is, of course, Abel Ferrara's controversial film starring Harvey Keitel. I'm not exactly a huge fan of this film, but it's not a terrible film either. It's sort of a very intense drama, and I think you kind of have to understand and appreciate the Abel Ferrara aesthetic. He makes interesting, challenging films, and this certainly counts as one of them. Now, this is the film's debut on Blu-ray, and as with a lot of Lionsgate catalog titles, it's a standard Blu-ray upgrade, and this is going to go for the next film I review as well. They're both kind of standard Blu-ray upgrades. You get slightly better picture, slightly better sound, nothing so amazing that if you already own the films on DVD, you have to rush out and purchase it. If you're a huge fan of Bad Lieutenant or Secretary, then sure, I always think Blu-ray is the best way to go, but you're not getting any new extra features, and the transfers and soundtracks, like I said, are just a minor upgrade, nothing overwhelmingly different about them. They're not the kind of films that really lend themselves to the most spectacular imagery available in high def. On Bad Lieutenant, the extra features include an audio commentary with Abel Ferrara, as well as the director of photography, Ken Kelch, and a retrospective documentary featuring interviews with the cast and crew, as well as the theatrical trailer. Now, Secretary is an interesting film. Like I said, it's much like The Bad Lieutenant, a standard upgrade from DVD to Blu-ray. But this movie got kind of a lot of also controversy around it because of the sort of sexual relationship in it between Maggie Gyllenhaal and James Spader. And I think some women objected to the film because Maggie Gyllenhaal really puts herself out there as this sort of almost a sex slave, if you will. Not in terms of human trafficking, but in terms of kind of this dependent relationship with her boss. It's an interesting movie. It's enjoyable enough. It is a pretty hard drama. There's not a ton of humor in it. The performances from James Spader and Maggie Gyllenhaal are both terrific. But for me, it's not the kind of movie that I could watch over and over again. This isn't one that I would feel the need to necessarily rush out and buy to add to my collection. If you do, however, consider yourself one of those people, what you'll get in terms of extra features are a commentary with the writer and director, a behind-the-scenes featurette, and a photo gallery. Likewise, again, the transfer and the soundtrack here, you get 7.1 master audio, but it's a film that's almost entirely driven by dialogue. So the 7.1 surround doesn't give you as much extra bang for your buck as you might hope. Next up, we have Atlantis, The Lost Continent, and this is another Warner Archive Collection release. And it's actually a George Pal production. You might remember George Pal. He kind of spearheaded a lot of huge science fiction films from back in like the 50s, like The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine, and was actually a pretty proficient filmmaker who made some pretty good, in an age where science fiction was full of cheese, he made some movies that were above the norm. For example, War of the Worlds and The Time Machine, which are both kind of classic science fiction in my opinion. Now, Atlantis, The Lost Continent, not so much with the classic science fiction. This is more of that cheesy science fiction. There is certainly something to be said for the scope of the film, which really does try and recreate this sort of entire fantasy city. But the movie just isn't great. The cast as well is fine. Nobody that you're going to really be a huge fan of. There's no real big-name stars in the movie. It got Anthony Hall, Joyce Taylor, John Dahl, Edward Platt, Bill Smith. Really nobody who went on to become a huge Hollywood star. And watching this movie, it's not really that hard to figure out why. That being said, if you have a love for 50s science fiction, this is certainly a movie that's enjoyable enough to make worth watching, but being that it's a Warner Archive release, you kind of have to be a fan of the film to watch it, because it's you can't just go and rent it at the store. You have to buy it from the Warner Archive, which is great. I'm glad they make films like this available, because there are people out there who will be really happy to see Atlantis, The Lost Continent on DVD. But unless you've already seen the film, I don't recommend that you go ahead and drop the full purchase price on it just to find out that it might not be as good as you hope. Finally, we have The Essential Games of the Seattle Mariners. This is a new box set from A&E, and they do a lot of these Essential Games box sets for various teams, and I've reviewed a few of them already, and they are great if you are a baseball fan. Of course, I mean, that just makes sense. If you're not a baseball fan, you certainly wouldn't enjoy a release like this. Basically, what you get are 4 essential Mariners games: the 1995 American League West Division I playoff game, the double, which is the American League Game 5 versus the New York Yankees, the home sweep home game, which is the 2000 Divisional Series versus Chicago, and the record-setting season where they're the division champion game versus Anaheim, which is from September 19th, 2001. So that's right after 9/11, which is kind of a important game, and you can tell there's a little more going on than just a game here. There's a ton of bonus features. You get about more than a dozen various extra clips, highlights from the team's history, and really a lot of great moments for Mariners fans. It's a 4-disc set. Each game is represented in its entirety, and I mean, if you're a Mariners fan, this is really just kind of made for you. Actually, it's only made for you because nobody else would really be interested in it unless you're just a diehard baseball fan who will watch any good game they can get their hands on. Really, this box set is made for those Mariners fans out there. But if you are a Mariners fan, this box set is definitely worth picking up.